Hello there. So I've had to have a couple of attempts at recording this particular video just purely because of logistics. So being in a house with three children, the only time that I really get any peace, quiet or time to do this kind of stuff is first thing in the morning. And I think just with the nights, the mornings getting a little bit less dark, um, the likelihood of getting disturbed goes up exponentially, I think. But let's see if we can get through the next 9 minutes without being disturbed this time. Um, and just also just because of the way I do the videos as well, I prefer to do things in one kind of take, if you like, a bit of a stream of consciousness, I suppose. But I think it just keeps it real. Like I've talked about before, I'm not one for style over substance. I think substance has to be the primary consideration, and that's what I'm always considering with these things is that what is it that I'm thinking that might be of value to other people, and then how do I kind of convey that using my own experiences, I suppose. And how can I do it? Drinking the tiniest cup of coffee ever. So what I had been thinking about was reflections on death and thinking about death. And I know that sounds morbid, but I just wanted to share some of maybe the kind of progression of my thoughts about death and dying and fear of death and dying, I suppose, and how my kind of thoughts on that have progressed over time. So when I was thinking about this topic, I would cast my mind back, and I think I was quite lucky as a child that it was never really, it's kind of what you hope for someone's childhood is that you don't really have to think about death and dying when you're a child. I don't think that applies to everyone, unfortunately. I think there are some people who are forced to confront it at a very early age, and I'm sure that colours your attitudes towards it when you're young, and then how your view on that develops as you get older. But I was one of those fortunate ones who never really lost anyone, close to me when I was very young. So it wasn't really something I gave much thought to. It was one of those kind of mystical things that you kind of sort of heard about happening in the background somewhere. My only memory from childhood, and I can't remember how old I was fairly young at the time, possibly primary school age. I remember a family friend dying quite suddenly, and I remember being disproportionately upset about it and not really being able to explain why. It wasn't necessarily someone I was overly close to, but I think it was just the suddenness of that, just that it's that thing that bothers me about it now. How can someone be there one day and then be gone the next? It just really kind of mystified me. So there was even that sense of loss when I was quite young, even for someone that don't remember being all that attached to. Then the next thing I remember after that is, your awareness obviously builds as you move in sort of bigger circles. As you go to bigger schools and you mix with different people, you hear things and you see things. And but really, my next awareness of death of someone close to me was probably losing a grandparent. And I think at that time I was probably late teens at that time. And also just families being families, didn't have the closest relationship with my grandparents at that time, for reasons out with my control. And yeah, I think that was a bit closer to home, but there had been there wasn't quite the close relationship there, but there was the history of a close relationship, which obviously made it quite sad. Um, and then after that, you're kind of getting into personal and professional experiences, so it was all heavily weighted on the professional side. So I knew when I went into my chosen career of medicine that was going to be something I was going to be confronted with. And I remember very vivid memories of being a medical student. Can't remember what year, maybe about third year or something, being on a placement in the A&E department. That was still back in the days when they used to make us wear white coats. So it was only medical students that wore white coats, and it was only that particular placement, I think. But I remember there being a couple of us there in the A&E department, and there was a cardiac arrest coming in, so they were quite keen to get us involved in helping with that. So that was my first experience of doing CPR on someone, so doing chest compressions on a real person. And there's something quite confronting about that, because when you're doing that, you're right over, you're right over that person. When you're doing, you're on your chest, on their chest, you can't really avoid but looking at their face. And that was an interesting experience. It was, borderline traumatizing, as you can imagine. At the time, I remember being quite stunned for a while afterwards about it. And then you move on from medical school, and a lot of it almost becomes a bit of an administrative thing. You're being called as a very, very junior doctor to confirm death, and there's procedures and paperwork and things that need to be followed. There's more sudden deteriorations and people dying that it can be a bit more shocking. But yeah, there was something quite transactional about doing the paperwork, doing the confirmation, doing the paperwork. Quite bizarre, especially on a night shift. Middle of the night, being called in to go into this room where there's no one in there other than the deceased. But yeah, quite sad. And then being really kind of confronted with death in a lot of different forms when I moved into working in emergency medicine. So when I was working in A&E, it could be something that you could be confronted with infrequently, or it could be something that you could see quite a lot of. And I remember it's quite a hard thing to juggle when you have to go from speaking to bereaved relatives who are very upset, immediately back into normal activity. And that was quite a hard switch to make. And also just being confronted with, the sudden nature of it as well. So, it would be sudden things that we would be dealing with usually by default, or sudden deteriorations. And, the ones that stick in my mind from recently, there was a guy who I'm pretty sure was working out in a local gym and had apparently been fine, and just suddenly collapsed on the rowing machine. And despite all efforts, I'm pretty sure there was even an off-duty paramedic there who tried to resuscitate him. He didn't survive, and there's dealing with the resuscitation, the decision making around that, and then there's the speaking to the relatives as well, which was always the bit that I always felt really passionately had to be done well, but it was always the bit that left you, feeling quite, sad at the loss involved. And then becoming a parent adds a whole new, different element to it. I really started to worry about my own mortality as soon as we had our first child. And there's a part selfish element to that. I want to be around for as long as I can to see them grow up, and I want to be there for them. And that is the kind of moving along the spectrum to the less selfish element of it, which is, I want to be around to provide for them, to, to help them through different things and to show them how to do things, so I want to be around to see that happen, and I want to be around to help as well. I just want to be around for them. And that was a really kind of confronting thing, and I did worry about that for quite a long time. And then there was a couple of things that helped, I guess. One of which was, you'll know that I'm heavily influenced by Stoic philosophy, to some degree. I listen to Daily Stoic most days, and a lot of their principles really resonate with me. And actually, what the Stoics do is that they meditate on that, on the inevitability of death. Memento mori, remember you will die. So, having that idea in mind, and that should influence how you behave in everyday life. And I think it's also that kind of Jocko Willink thing of extreme acceptance as well, just accepting that you have a finite existence and you will not be here forever, and worrying about that's not going to change it. So actually, live your life in accordance with that. As Ryan Holiday says on Daily Stoic, every new day is a bonus. You're playing with house money, so make the most of it. And yeah, I still worry about death and dying and leaving people behind, but I embrace the things that I can control about it, and the things that I can't, and I just try my best to live my life. So yeah, that's my reflections on death and dying. So hopefully that's not been too morbid for you. Let me know what your thoughts are. Is it something you worry about a lot? How do you manage that? How do you make sure that you meditate on that and that you live your life the best you can?